For nearly 300 years, there was a stretch of land between England and Scotland where no law applied. Not English law, not Scottish law, not the law of the church, nothing. The people who lived there didn't call themselves outlaws, they called themselves Reivers. And for 3 centuries, from the 14th to the early 17th century, they raided, feuded, stole, murdered, and survived on a frontier that both kingdoms had essentially abandoned. Their names are still here, walking around in the world today, and if you carry one of them in America, in Canada, in Australia, wherever the Scots-Irish diaspora scattered, you are carrying the name of a riding family from one of the most violent frontiers in European history. 20 of those names, their stories. Let's begin. Before we begin, I need to explain what a Border Reiver actually was, because the word reiver is not as well known as it deserves to be. The word comes from the Scots verb to reive, meaning to plunder, to rob, to raid. The Reivers were the families who lived on the Anglo-Scottish border in a region called the Marches, from roughly the 14th century to the early 17th century. This border was divided into 6 marches, 3 on the Scottish side and 3 on the English side. Each march had a warden appointed to maintain order. Most of the time, the wardens were as lawless as the people they were supposed to control. The Reivers were not a clan system in the Highland sense. They were riding families, blood-based groups whose first and only loyalty was to their surname, not to England, not to Scotland, not to any king, to the name. They raided across the border in both directions. Scottish families raided England, English families raided Scotland, and sometimes both raided each other, regardless of which side of the border they were on. George MacDonald Fraser, whose 1971 book, The Steel Bonnets, remains the definitive history of the Reivers, records 74 family names in surviving documents from the 16th and 17th centuries. The Reivers gave the English language at least 2 words still in use today. Blackmail comes from the tribute the Reivers extorted from farmers. Pay us, and we won't burn your house. Bereaved, in its original form, comes from the act of reaving itself. To be bereaved was to have had something taken from you by force. In 1603, when James VI of Scotland became James I of England and the 2 kingdoms united, the border lost its reason for existing. James pacified the marches with deliberate ruthlessness. Some Reiver families were executed, some were dispersed, and many, particularly the most troublesome riding families, were transplanted to Ulster, to the plantation of Ireland, where the English crown hoped the same ferocity that had made them ungovernable in the borders might be useful against the Irish. From Ulster, a generation later, those families crossed the Atlantic. To Virginia, to the Carolinas, to Pennsylvania, to the Appalachian frontier, the Scots-Irish, the Ulster Scots carried their border names with them. 20 of those names. Let's decode them. Number 20, Young. The youngest but one of the oldest riding families. We begin with the most deceptively ordinary name on this list. Young as a surname typically derives from Old English geong, meaning young, and was used as a distinguishing nickname, often to tell apart a father and son with the same given name. The younger became Young, but Young appears on the historical Border Reiver list, documented in surviving records from the 16th and 17th centuries. The Young family were a riding family of Liddesdale, that long, narrow valley in the Scottish borders that George MacDonald Fraser called the cockpit of the border, the most consistently lawless stretch of territory on the entire frontier. It is a name so common today in America, in Britain, in Australia that almost no one thinks of it as carrying anything particular. But among the families who rode the border, the Youngs were there, documented, raiding and feuding alongside the Armstrongs, the Elliots, and the Nixons. The most ordinary name, one of the oldest riding families. Number 19, Burns, the stream and the name of Scotland's national poet. Burns derives from the Old English and Scots word burn, a small stream or brook. It is a topographic name. The man who lived by the burn became Burns. The name appears in the historical record of Border Reiver families. The Burn family are documented in the list of riding surnames from surviving 16th century court and border papers. They were associated particularly with the Scottish East March. The most famous bearer of the surname is Robert Burns, 1759 to 1796, Scotland's national poet. whose family came from Ayrshire, not the Borders, but the name's presence in the Reiver records is documented independently of him in the calendar of border papers that predate his birth by more than a century. Burns is also one of the names that crossed to Ulster and then to America with the Scots-Irish migration, where it became one of the most recognizable surnames of Irish and Scots-Irish descent in North America. Number 18, Wilson. Son of Will, but which Will? Wilson means son of Will, a patronymic from the given name William. It is one of the most common surnames in the English-speaking world, but it also appears consistently in the list of Border Reiver families documented in historical records. The Wilson family are recorded in the surviving documents of the Anglo-Scottish border, court records, property agreements, and the calendar of border papers compiled from state documents between 1560 and 1603. What makes Wilson particularly interesting in the Scots-Irish context is the sheer scale of its spread through the Ulster Scots diaspora. Among the most common Scots-Irish surnames in America, Wilson features consistently, and United States President Woodrow Wilson was of Scots-Irish descent, his grandfather having immigrated from Ulster. A patronymic, a raiding family, a presidential surname, the same name carried through 3 centuries and 2 oceans. Number 17, Watson, son of Wat, the warlord's family name. Watson means son of Wat, a medieval shortening of Walter. It appears in the list of Border Reiver surnames documented from historical records of the 16th and 17th centuries, but the most significant Wat in border history was not a Watson, he was Walter Scott of Buccleuch, known as Bold Buccleuch, the keeper of Liddesdale, who organized the rescue of Kinmont Willie Armstrong from Carlisle Castle in 1596. The Watson families of the Borders were part of the same naming culture, sons of men named Wat, in a landscape where Walter, Wat, was a common given name among the fighting classes. Watson is among the documented Scots-Irish surnames that traveled to Ulster and then to America. It is today widespread across the English-speaking world, with its border origins largely forgotten. Number 16, Thompson and Thomson, son of Thomas, the apostle's name as a writing family. Thompson, or Thompson in the Scottish spelling, means son of Thomas from the biblical apostle whose name came from Aramaic, meaning twin. The Thompson and Thomson family is documented in the surviving records of the Border Reivers, appearing in the list of family names compiled from 16th and 17th century court and property records. They were present on both sides of the border in both the English and Scottish marches. Thompson is one of the names that illustrates a crucial point about the Scots-Irish diaspora. The same family name appears in different spellings depending on where the family ended up. Scottish Thompsons became Irish Thompsons and American Thompsons as clerks and registrars wrote down what they heard rather than what the family had originally spelled. One of the most common surnames in the United States, Thompson has largely lost its border connection in popular memory. But in the calendar of border papers, the Thompsons are there, documented, writing, feuding. Number 15, Henderson, son of Henry and the keepers of Liddesdale. Henderson means son of Henry, a patronymic from the Norman given name Henry, which came from the Germanic Heimrich, meaning home ruler. The Henderson family are specifically documented as a Border Reiver family of Liddesdale, recorded in George MacDonald Fraser's The Steel Bonnets in the list of Westmarch and Liddesdale writing surnames. Liddesdale was the most consistently violent valley on the entire border, home to the Armstrongs, the Elliots, the Nixons, the Croziers, and the Hendersons. Henderson is listed among the most common Scots-Irish surnames in America, a direct trace of the family's transit from the Scottish borders to Ulster to the American colonies. Andrew Henderson, like many Scots-Irish immigrants, would have carried this border name across the Atlantic with little awareness of what it had meant 2 generations earlier on the frontier of Liddesdale. Number 14, Irvine, Erwin, the Green River and the family that helped rescue Kinmont Willie. Irvine, in its various spellings, Irwin, Irving, derives from a place name, the River Irvine in Ayrshire, or the settlement of Irvine. The name comes from a Brythonic Celtic root meaning green water or green river. The Irvine family are not only documented as Border Reivers, they played a specific named role in one of the most dramatic events in border history, the rescue of Kinmont Willie Armstrong from Carlisle Castle on 13 April 1596. Historical records of the rescue describe the Irvines of Bonshaw, whose tower still stands near Kirtle Bridge in Dumfriesshire, breaking away from the main rescue party and concealing themselves near the road north to cover the escape route. In the Celtic ancestry gifts, documentation of Border Reiver families, Irvine is listed directly. The Border Reiver names Armstrong, Elliot, Bell, Graham, Johnstone, Irvine, Kerr, Little, Maxwell, Scott, Young descend from the riding families of the Anglo-Scottish frontier, many transplanted to Ulster in the pacification after 1603. The spelling drift is documented. Scottish Irvine became Irish Erwin or Erwin. Same family, different phonetics on different sides of the Irish Sea. Number 13, Scot, the man from Scotland who became the most powerful clan on the border. Scot is both an ethnic name, literally the Scot, the man from Scotland, and one of the most powerful and documented Border Reiver families in history. The Clan Scot, registered with the court of Lord Lion in Edinburgh as a Scottish clan, controlled the Middle March on the Scottish side of the border. Their chief seat was Branksholme Tower on the River Teviot, and their most famous chief was Walter Scott of Buccleuch, called Bold Buccleuch, the keeper of Liddesdale, who organized the raid on Carlisle Castle to free Kinmont Willie Armstrong. George MacDonald Fraser devotes considerable space to the Scots in the Steel Bonnets. They were engaged in a bitter, long-running vendetta with the Charltons of the English side, one of the defining feuds of the border era. At their peak, the Scots could field hundreds of mounted men. The name Scot crossed to Ulster with the Scots-Irish migration and is among the most common Scots-Irish surnames in America today. Sir Walter Scott, the 19th century novelist who romanticized the border world in minstrelsy of the Scottish border and the Waverley novels, was a direct descendant of the writing family. Number 12, Maxwell, Lords of the West March, the most powerful border family you've never heard of. Maxwell derives from a place named Maccus's Pool, from the Anglo-Saxon personal name Maccus, combined with Old English Wella. The Maxwell family took their name from a location on the River Tweed near Kelso, but what the Maxwells became is more remarkable than where they started. The Maxwells were one of the dominant power families of the Scottish West March. The Warden of the Scottish West March was frequently a Maxwell, which meant that the family supposedly appointed to control the Reivers was itself one of the most powerful Reiver families on the frontier. This was not unusual. Across the marches, the Wardens and the Raiders were often the same people or close relatives. Maxwell is documented in every major source on the Border Reivers. Fraser's The Steel Bonnets, the Calendar of Border Papers, the list of 74 family names in Carlisle. It is listed among the Scots-Irish surnames transplanted to Ulster after 1603 and subsequently carried to America. Number 11, Kerr, left-handed fighters, and the tower houses built for them. Kerr, in its various spellings, Carr and Kerr, derives from a Norse or Old English word meaning boggy ground or thicket. It is a topographic name like many border surnames, but the Kerrs have a specific legend attached to them that appears in multiple historical sources. They were said to be predominantly left-handed, and their tower houses, most notably Fernie Hearse Castle near Jedburgh, were allegedly built with staircases that wound anti-clockwise, so that a left-handed defender retreating upstairs would have a fighting advantage over a right-handed attacker coming up. The historical accuracy of this tradition is debated by modern historians. What is not debated is the Kerr family's prominence on the border. They controlled significant territory in Teviotdale on the Scottish side and were registered with the court of Lord Lion as a Scottish clan. They are documented in Fraser's The Steel Bonnets and in the Calendar of Border Papers. Kerr, often written as Carr in English records and in the Scots-Irish diaspora, is listed among the most common Scots-Irish surnames in America. Number 10, Nixon, named in a document that nearly started a war and carried to the White House. Nixon means son of Nick, a patronymic from the given name Nicholas, itself from the Greek Nikolaos, meaning victory of the people. But the Nixon family of the Scottish border were anything but ordinary bearers of a saint's name. The Nixons are specifically documented among the most feared riding families of Liddesdale, the cockpit of the border. They appear in the calendar of border papers, in Fraser's The Steel Bonnets, and in the comprehensive list of 74 family names compiled from surviving 16th and 17th century documents. The Border Reivers history website names the Nixons directly. Armstrong, Elliot, Graham, Irvine, Johnstone, Kerr, Maxwell, Nixon, and Scott were among the families who rode, feuded, fought, and plundered over the border area for 350 years. The Nixon family traveled to Ulster with the Scots-Irish migration and subsequently to America. Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, was of Scots-Irish descent. His family name a direct trace from the Liddesdale raiding families, through Ulster to the American frontier and eventually to the Oval Office. A Nixon who rode with the Armstrongs in the 1590s would have found it difficult to imagine that his surname would one day belong to a president, but the name made that journey one of the longest in any surname's history. Number 9, Bell. Great. Hostile to the Grahams, the Westmarch family. Bell derives from Old English and Old French belle, beautiful, or from a topographic name for someone who lived near a bell or a bell tower. As a surname, it has multiple possible origins, but the Bell family of the Scottish Westmarch are specifically documented as Border Reivers, and with a specific characterization that appears in Fraser's The Steel Bonnets, Bell, English and Scottish, a great surname of the Westmarch, particularly hostile to the Grahams. That one line tells you everything about the border world. Not hostile to the English crown, not hostile to law enforcement, hostile to the Grahams, because on the border, the primary allegiance was to surname, and the primary enemies were the other surnames. The most famous bearer of the name Bell is Alexander Graham Bell, inventor of the telephone, who was born in Edinburgh in 1847. His middle name, Graham, is itself another documented Border Reiver surname. His full name thus combines two of the writing families of the border in a single person. Bell is listed among the core Border Reiver surnames on every major source, and among the Scots-Irish names transplanted to Ulster after 1603. Number 8, Johnstone Johnstone. The clan that feuded with the Maxwells for a century and left 2,000 dead. Johnstone Johnstone in its anglicized form derives from a place name, Johnstown, a settlement associated with a man named John. It is a habitation surname, but the Johnstone family of Annandale were one of the most formidable riding clans on the Scottish Westmarch, and their feud with the Maxwells is one of the defining stories of the entire border era. The Maxwell-Johnstone feud lasted for over a century, punctuated by massacres, ambushes, and retaliations that left hundreds dead on both sides. The climax came at the Battle of Dry Sands on the 6th of December 1593, when the Johnstones inflicted a devastating defeat on a Maxwell force of approximately 2,000 horsemen. Wikipedia records approximately 700 Maxwells killed. The Maxwell chief, Lord Maxwell, was himself unhorsed and killed in the battle, reportedly raising his hand in surrender before being cut down. His son, the next Lord Maxwell, arranged a reconciliation meeting with the Johnstone chief in 1608, then shot him twice in the back, killing him instantly. Lord Maxwell fled to France, returned to Scotland, was arrested, and was publicly beheaded in Edinburgh in 1613. The Johnstone family are registered with the court of Lord Lyon in Edinburgh as a Scottish clan. They are documented in Fraser's The Steel Bonnets and in the calendar of border papers. After 1603, they were among the families transplanted to Ulster, where the name became Johnston, shedding the final E in the process. Celtic ancestry gifts documents the spelling drift directly. Scottish Johnstone generally became Johnston in Ulster and America. Same families, softened spellings. Number 7, Graham. The most dangerous family on the English side, and Alexander Graham Bell's other name. Graham, as we encountered in our Scottish surnames video, derives from a Norman place name, Grantham in Lincolnshire. The de Graham family came to Scotland with David I in the 12th century. But on the border, the Grahams became something entirely different from their Norman origins. They settled in the Debatable Land, the strip of territory between the Scottish and English marches that was claimed by both kingdoms and effectively governed by neither. There, the Grahams became one of the most feared and resented families on the entire frontier. What made the border Grahams uniquely dangerous was their geography. The debatable land gave them freedom to raid in all directions and to play both sides, sometimes informing for the English Wardens, sometimes raiding English settlements, sometimes riding with the Scottish families. This made them useful to everyone and trusted by no one. When James VI and first pacified the borders after 1603, the Grahams were specifically targeted for dispersal as one of the most troublesome of all the riding families. Many were transported to Ireland, to the Low Countries, and to the English army serving in the Netherlands. Graham is documented in every major source on the Border Reivers. It is among the most common Scots-Irish surnames in America, and Alexander Graham Bell, whose middle name was Graham, combined two border surnames in a single inventor's name. Number 6, Elliot. The clan whose 4 spellings are a history lesson. Elliot, in its 4 main spellings, Elliot, and Elliot, is one of the most documented of all Border Reiver families. The name itself is debated by etymologists. It may derive from a Norman form of the Old English personal name Ethelherd or from the Old French Eli. Its precise origin is less certain than its history. The Elliot family of Liddesdale were among the most feared riding clans on the Scottish border. They are registered with the court of Lord Lyon in Edinburgh as a Scottish clan. They appear in Fraser's The Steel Bonnets, in the Calendar of Border Papers, and in the comprehensive list of 74 family names compiled from 16th and 17th century documents. George MacDonald Fraser describes the Elliots as the worst of the East Teviotdale Reivers, a significant claim given the competition. They were supposedly responsible for killing 17 members of the Collingwood family in revenge for the death of one of their own. The 4 spellings of the name are themselves a historical document. Elliot was the original Scottish spelling. Elliot became the most common Scottish form. Elliot is the dominant English and American spelling. Elliot is the rarer, more literary form, T.S. Eliot. The poet spelled it this way. If you carry any of these spellings, you are carrying the same name, just recorded by different clerks in different centuries. Number 5, Armstrong. 3,000 men in the saddle, the most feared family on the frontier. We have reached the name that, more than any other on this list, defines what it meant to be a Border Reiver. Armstrong, meaning son of a strong-armed man, is the most feared, most documented, and most powerful of all the riding families. The Armstrong family held sway in the English West March and the Scottish Middle March. By 1528, according to Fraser's The Steel Bonnets, they could put 3,000 men into the saddle, a figure that made them a significant military force by the standards of the age, and a problem that both the English and Scottish crowns struggled to address for the better part of a century. The most famous Armstrong story is the execution of Johnny Armstrong of Gilnockie in 1530. King James V of Scotland lured him to a meeting under safe conduct and had him hanged on the spot along with 36 of his men at Caerlinrig Chapel without trial. The betrayal did not destroy the Armstrongs. Within a generation, Kinmont Willie Armstrong had become the most notorious raider on the entire border. Kinmont William Armstrong of Kinmont, born around 1550, led raids with up to 300 men known as Kinmont's Bairns. His capture on a truce day in March 1596, a violation of the safe conduct rules that govern border meetings, sparked outrage across the Scottish marches and led directly to the daring rescue from Carlisle Castle on the 13th of April 1596, when Walter Scott of Buccleuch led approximately 80 men across the border, entered the castle, and freed him. The incident nearly caused a war between England and Scotland, with Queen Elizabeth I demanding an explanation from James VI. Armstrong is registered with the court of Lord Lyon as a Scottish clan. It is listed as the most feared riding clan on the frontier by every major historian of the border, and it traveled to Ulster after 1603 and then to America, where Neil Armstrong, the first human being to walk on the moon, carried a border raider's surname into space. Number 4, Robson. One of the hardiest English families on the frontier. Robson means son of Rob, a patronymic from the given name Robert, ultimately from the Germanic Hrodeber, meaning bright fame. The Robson family were one of the most significant English Border Reiver families operating in Tynedale and Redesdale on the English side of the frontier. They are documented in Fraser's The Steel Bonnets, in the Calendar of Border Papers, and in the comprehensive list of 74 Reiver family names. The Robsons feature in one of the most referenced passages in border history. George MacDonald Fraser describes them as among the hardiest and most intractable of the English writing families, engaged in the same pattern of raiding, feuding, and blood vengeance that characterized every family on the frontier. Robson crossed to Ulster with the Scots-Irish migration and is documented among the Scots-Irish surnames that traveled to America. It is today widespread across the English-speaking world, its border origins largely unknown to most of its bearers. Number 3. Turnbull. The man who turned the bull and the legend that became a surname. Turnbull is one of the few border surnames where a legend about the name's origin has survived in historical tradition, and it is extraordinary enough to repeat. The traditional account, recorded in multiple border histories, holds that the name originated when a man saved the life of Robert the Bruce by seizing a charging bull by the horns and turning it away from the king. Bruce is said to have rewarded him with land and the byname Turnbull. The historicity of this specific story cannot be verified, but it reflects the genuine warrior culture of the border families and the way names were acquired through dramatic acts. What is documented is the Turnbull family's presence on the border as a writing family in historical records. They are registered with the court of Lord Lyon as a Scottish clan. They appear in Fraser's The Steel Bonnets and in the Calendar of Border Papers. Their territory was in Teviotdale on the Scottish Middlemarch. George MacDonald Fraser describes the Turnbulls as one of the classic border riding families, feuding, raiding, and surviving with the same fierce loyalty to surname that characterized all the great border clans. Turnbull crossed to Ulster with the Scots-Irish migration and is found in Scots-Irish diaspora communities in America. Number 2, Crozer. The small family that rode with everyone and trusted no one. Crozer, or Crozer in the older spelling, derives from Old French croisier, meaning a crossbearer or maker of crosses. As an occupational name, it referred to the person who carried the bishop's crook in a religious procession. The Crozer family of the border had nothing particularly religious about them. George MacDonald Fraser describes them in The Steel Bonnets as a small but hard-riding family often associated with Nixons and Elliots and often allied with England. That last phrase is significant. In a world where loyalty was first to surname and second to whoever was most advantageous, the Crozers played both sides of the border with notable pragmatism. The Crozers are documented in the comprehensive list of 74 family names compiled from 16th and 17th century records. They are registered with the court of Lord Lyon as a Scottish clan, one of the smaller clan registrations, reflecting their size relative to the Armstrongs or the Scots, a small family, hard riders, trusted by no one, feared in their own right. Number 1, Rutherford. The cattle ford, and the name that connects a poet, a physicist, and a border raider. We end with a name that, on the surface, seems the most ordinary of all, and that carries inside it one of the most extraordinary chains of inheritance in any surname's history. Rutherford derives from a place name, a ford across the River Teviot in Roxburghshire, where cattle were driven across the river. Ruther comes from Old English rider, meaning cattle, and ford is the crossing. The Rutherford was the cattle ford. The Rutherford family took their name from this place, and they are documented as a Border Reiver family in the list of writing surnames compiled from 16th and 17th century records. They appear in Fraser's The Steel Bonnets and in the Calendar of Border Papers. Their territory was in the Scottish Middlemarch. After 1603, the Rutherford name followed the Scots-Irish migration to Ulster and from Ulster to the world. And here's where the story becomes extraordinary. Samuel Rutherford, a 17th century Scottish Presbyterian minister born in Nisbet, Roxburghshire in the Scottish borders, wrote hundreds of letters during his exile and house arrest in Aberdeen between 1637 and 1638, where he had been confined by the Bishop of Galloway for his outspoken Presbyterianism. Those letters became one of the most influential works of devotional Christian literature in the English-speaking world, reprinted in dozens of editions and read widely across the communities of Scottish Presbyterian faith, including the Scots-Irish communities that settled in Ulster and then in Appalachian America. And then in New Zealand in 1871, a boy named Ernest Rutherford was born. His father, James Rutherford, was a Scottish wheelwright who had emigrated to New Zealand as a child, making Ernest Rutherford, of Scottish descent, part of the same broader Scottish diaspora that included the Border families. He became the physicist who discovered the nuclear structure of the atom, who laid the theoretical foundation for nuclear physics and eventually for everything that followed from it. He is considered the father of nuclear physics. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1908, a cattle ford in Roxburghshire, a Border Raiders family name, a Presbyterian minister's letters read by Appalachian settlers, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who split the atom. The Rutherford name carried all of it. That is what a surname really is. Not just a label, a chain, running from a cattle crossing in the Scottish borders through 300 years of raiding and feuding and immigration and faith and science to the moment someone first understood what matter is made of. Your surname carries a chain like that. You just have to know where to look. 20 surnames, 300 years of raiding, and one question that I want to leave you with. Why does this matter? Because the Border Reivers were not romantic outlaws. They were people living in an impossible situation, caught between two kingdoms, abandoned by both, surviving by the only means available to them. Their violence was real. Their feuds cost real lives. Their raids destroyed real homes. And yet the culture they created, the loyalty to surname above all else, the fierce independence, the distrust of government, the willingness to fight. These traits traveled with the Scots-Irish diaspora to Ulster and then to America, where historians have argued they became foundational to a specific kind of American character, particularly in the Appalachian communities where the Scots-Irish settled in the 18th century. If you carry one of these names, you carry that inheritance. Not as a burden, as a story. Tell me in the comments, which of these names is yours, and did anything you heard today surprise you? If this video was worth your time, a like genuinely helps the channel. Subscribe for more deep dives into the bloodlines that shaped history. See you in the next one.